Honestly, Ms. Holloway, your resume is rather sparse for a senior analyst role, isn't it? Community volunteer and freelance research assistant. We're looking for a dynamic go-getter, not someone dabbling in hobbies, sneered Mark Henderson, the smirking head of acquisitions at Innovate Solutions, Inc. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, exchanging an amused glance with Sarah Jenkins, the HR manager, who tittered politely. Evelyn Holloway, 38, dressed in a simple but neat navy suit that looked a size too big, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, glasses perched on her nose, merely offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. Experience can be diverse, Mr. Henderson. Sometimes the most profound insights come from unconventional paths. Henderson just chuckled, rustling her papers dismissively. Quaint. Very quaint. They had no idea they were currently interviewing, and thoroughly insulting Eleanor Vance, the newly appointed incognito CEO of the parent company that had acquired Innovate Solutions just last month. If you believe true leadership listens before it speaks, comment insight below. Eleanor Vance, known to the world as the formidable CEO of Vance Global Holdings, a multinational conglomerate, was a woman who valued substance over style, results over rhetoric. At 52, she had built an empire through sharp intellect, relentless drive, and an uncanny ability to see potential where others saw only problems. She was also known for her hands-on approach. When Vance Global acquired Innovate Solutions, Inc., a mid-sized tech firm with a brilliant core product but rumors of a deeply toxic internal culture and inefficient nepotistic management, Eleanor decided against a typical corporate takeover. She wanted to see the rot from the inside, to understand the employee experience unfiltered by layers of yes-men. So, she had orchestrated a discreet plan. Under the guise of Evelyn Holloway, a fictional persona with a deliberately understated, almost unimpressive resume, she applied for a senior analyst position, a role that would give her access to multiple departments and observe mid-level management directly. Her disguise was simple but effective: ill-fitting, conservative business attire bought off the rack, minimal makeup, plain glasses, and a hairstyle that added 10 years to her appearance. She even adopted a slightly hesitant, overly polite speech pattern. Only her most trusted chief of staff, David Chen, knew her true whereabouts and purpose. He was her lifeline, her outside contact, ready to act on her signal. Today was the day of her interview at Innovate Solutions, an office located in a bland suburban tech park, a far cry from the gleaming Vance Global headquarters downtown. As she walked into the lobby, she noted the slightly frayed carpets, the outdated posters, the palpable lack of energy among the few employees she saw. It wasn't a vibrant hub of innovation. It felt more like a place where ambition went to die. The receptionist, after a lengthy board search, finally found Evelyn Holloway on the schedule and directed her to a small, windowless waiting room with uncomfortable plastic chairs and stale coffee. This was already a stark contrast to the candidate experience Vance Global prided itself on. Evelyn sat patiently, observing, her mind a silent, whirring supercomputer, cataloguing every detail, every nuance of the environment. This was not just an interview, it was an anthropological study of corporate dysfunction. She knew Innovate had some brilliant engineers, the reason for the acquisition, but if the management culture was as bad as rumored, those engineers would soon be poached, and Vance Global's investment would be worthless. The Evelyn Holloway persona was designed to be easily underestimated, someone they wouldn't see as a threat, someone they might even feel comfortable being their true, unfiltered selves around. She was counting on it. The door creaked open, and a harried-looking administrative assistant called her name, mispronouncing it slightly. The interview was about to begin, and Eleanor braced herself. She had a feeling this would be an illuminating, if deeply unpleasant, experience. She reminded herself of her purpose, to diagnose the illness before prescribing the cure. The interview room was as uninspiring as the waiting area, a generic conference room with a scuffed table, mismatched chairs, and fluorescent lighting that cast a pallid, unflattering glow. Seated at one end of the table were Mark Henderson, head of acquisitions, and Sarah Jenkins, HR manager. Henderson was in his late 40s, with a slicked-back hairstyle that seemed to be fighting a losing battle with a receding hairline, a loud tie, and an air of unearned self-importance. Jenkins, younger, impeccably dressed in a power suit that seemed a size too small, had a brittle smile and eyes that scanned Evelyn's resume with barely concealed disdain. "Ms. Holloway, thank you for coming in," Henderson began, his tone suggesting it was a great imposition on his valuable time. "As you know, we're Innovate Solutions, a leader in cutting-edge, solutions." He waved a vague hand. "And we're looking for dynamic, forward-thinking individuals to join our acquisitions team as a senior analyst." He picked up Evelyn's deliberately modest resume. "Frankly, your background is unconventional for this level of role. Freelance research assistant? Community outreach volunteer? Could you perhaps elaborate on how that prepares you for the aggressive world of corporate acquisitions?" His voice dripped with sarcasm on the word aggressive. Evelyn maintained her calm, unassuming demeanor. "Mr. Henderson, research, whether freelance or academic, hones analytical skills, attention to detail, and the ability to synthesize complex information, all crucial in due diligence for acquisitions. My volunteer work involved extensive project management, budget oversight for community programs, and, importantly, understanding diverse human motivations and needs, which is vital when assessing the human capital of any target company." Jenkins chimed in, her smile tight. "While that's admirable, Ms. Holloway, our senior analysts typically come from top-tier MBA programs, investment banking backgrounds, or have years of direct M&A experience. Your resume lists a bachelor's in sociology and a certificate in library science. How do you see that competing?" Sociology provides a deep understanding of organizational structures, group dynamics, and societal trends, all relevant to assessing a company's internal health and external market position, Evelyn replied evenly. "And library science at its core is about information architecture, data management, and meticulous verification of sources. In a world decisia opartina danich, these are foundational skills." Henderson chuckled. "Foundational, perhaps, but we're building skyscrapers here, Miss Holloway, not laying bricks for a garden path. This role requires a certain killer instinct. Do you have that killer instinct?" He leaned forward, trying to intimidate her. Evelyn met his gaze. "I believe in thoroughness, Mr. Henderson, and in ensuring that any kill is based on sound strategy and verifiable facts, not just aggressive posturing. Uninformed aggression often leads to costly mistakes in your field. Wouldn't you agree?" Her quiet, almost academic response seemed to deflate him slightly. He hadn't expected such a precise, if understated, rebuttal. Jenkins jumped in again, flipping a page of the resume. "It says here you took a career break for several years. What were you doing then, Ms. Holloway? Finding yourself?" Her tone was mocking. Evelyn paused, the fictional backstory she'd created ready. "I was managing complex family health issues and estate matters, which required significant organizational, financial, and negotiation skills under considerable pressure. It was a demanding full-time responsibility." "So, a homemaker, essentially," Jenkins summarized with a dismissive sniff. The interview continued in this vein for another 20 minutes. Henderson asked leading, almost trick questions, trying to catch her out. Jenkins probed for weaknesses, her questions often veering into the inappropriately personal. They interrupted her frequently, exchanged knowing glances, and made little effort to hide their skepticism, or increasingly their boredom, with what they clearly perceived as a waste of their time with an unqualified candidate. Evelyn, meanwhile, continued to answer calmly and thoughtfully, carefully observing their interactions, their assumptions, their biases. She noted their lack of preparation, their reliance on superficial judgments, their casual disrespect, not just for her, but for the interview process itself. Every condescending question, every dismissive gesture was another piece of data, another confirmation of the deep-seated cultural problems at Innovate Solutions. The questions then veered into the absurd, almost as if Henderson and Jenkins were amusing themselves at her expense. "Ms. Holloway," Henderson began, a smirk playing on his lips. "This senior analyst role often involves high-pressure negotiations with some very tough characters. You seem rather mild-mannered. How would you handle a CEO who's screaming at you across the table, threatening to walk away from a billion-dollar deal? Evelyn considered this. Firstly, Mr. Henderson, I believe that professionalism, even under duress, is paramount. Secondly, if a CEO is resorting to screaming, it often indicates a position of weakness or a lack of substantive arguments. My approach would be to remain calm, reiterate the data-supported value proposition, and explore constructive solutions. If the behavior persisted unproductively, I would politely suggest reconvening when a more rational discussion could be had. Allowing oneself to be drawn into emotional theatrics rarely serves the best interests of a deal. Henderson looked disappointed, as if he'd hoped for a more flustered or aggressive response. So, you wouldn't fight fire with fire? No table pounding? I find data more persuasive than decibels, sir, Evelyn replied quietly. Jenkins then asked, "What are your salary expectations, Ms. Holloway? Keeping in mind your limited direct experience in this specific sector." She emphasized limited with a delicate sneer. "My salary expectations would be commensurate with the responsibilities of a senior analyst role at a company of Innovate Solutions standing and reflective of the value I can bring through diligent research and insightful analysis," Evelyn answered, giving a textbook non-committal response. "But give us a number," Henderson pressed, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Are we talking intern wages, or are you expecting to actually buy groceries?" His attempt at humor fell flat, sounding merely boorish. Evelyn felt a flicker of genuine annoyance, but her outward demeanor remained serene. "I'm confident that should Innovate Solutions find my qualifications suitable, we could reach a mutually agreeable figure based on industry standards and the role's specific demands." She noted how they focused on superficials, on trying to dominate and belittle, rather than genuinely assessing potential. They weren't looking for talent. They were looking for someone who fit their preconceived mold, someone who would likely perpetuate the existing culture. She saw them check their watches. They had clearly already dismissed her. Jenkins began shuffling papers, a clear signal the interview was winding down. "Well, Ms. Holloway?" Henderson said, standing up and extending a perfunctory hand, his handshake limp and dismissive. "Thank you for your time. We have several other candidates to see, many with more traditional backgrounds. We'll be in touch if your profile meets our needs." The implication was clear. It didn't. Sarah Jenkins offered a similarly dismissive nod. "Yes, thank you for coming in." They made no effort to escort her out, already turning to each other, likely to share a laugh at the quaint sociologist who thought she could be an M&A analyst. Evelyn simply nodded politely. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Henderson, Ms. Jenkins." She turned and walked calmly out of the conference room, her expression unreadable. Once in the corridor, she took a deep breath. The interview had been even worse than she'd anticipated. The level of unprofessionalism, arrogance, and casual cruelty was astounding. It confirmed her worst fears about Innovate Solutions. This wasn't just a struggling company, it was a sick one, and the illness started at the top of its departmental management. As Evelyn walked back through the drab corridors towards the lobby, she saw the same harried administrative assistant who had called her in. The assistant avoided eye contact, already busy with another task, reinforcing the sense of an impersonal, uncaring environment. Reaching a quiet alcove near a rarely used emergency exit, Evelyn discreetly pulled out her own sleek, encrypted smartphone, a stark contrast to the simple burner phone she carried as Evelyn Holloway. She sent a single, pre-coded text message to her Chief of Staff, David Chen. Phase 1 observation complete. Initiate Phase 2. This was the signal. David, waiting at a nearby off-site location with a small, trusted team from Vance Global's corporate headquarters, would now set events in motion. Phase 2 involved the unexpected arrival of senior Vance Global executives at Innovate Solutions for an emergency systems audit and HR review, a pretext that would allow them to secure data, observe freely, and give Eleanor the opening she needed to reveal herself. Evelyn then composed herself, smoothed down her ill-fitting suit, and walked back towards the main lobby, intending to wait there as if expecting a taxi. She wanted to be present when Phase 2 commenced. She sat on one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, picking up an out-of-date business magazine, appearing for all the world like a slightly dejected job applicant waiting for her ride. Less than 15 minutes later, the main doors of Innovate Solutions slid open with a decisive swoosh, not for a single visitor, but for a group of 4 individuals who moved with an air of quiet, focused authority that instantly changed the atmosphere in the sleepy lobby. Leading them was David Chen, Eleanor's chief of staff, a man whose calm demeanor masked a razor-sharp intellect and unwavering loyalty. With him were Anya Sharma, Vance Global's formidable head of human resources, and 2 senior internal auditors from HQ. They were all dressed in the understated but impeccably tailored power suits typical of Vance Global executives. The Innovate Solutions receptionist, who had been idly scrolling on her phone, looked up, startled by their purposeful entry. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice suddenly less bored. David Chen stepped forward. David Chen, Chief of Staff, Vance Global Holdings. "We're here for an immediate and comprehensive operational review with Mr. Mark Henderson and Ms. Sarah Jenkins. Please inform them we've arrived and will require access to their departmental records and personnel files without delay." The receptionist's eyes widened. Vance Global Holdings, the Chief of Staff, here now? She fumbled for her phone, her fingers suddenly clumsy. Yes, sir. Right away, sir." The shift in her demeanor was instantaneous and telling. The name Vance Global clearly carried immense weight. Eleanor, still seated in the waiting area, watched the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction, the first act of her corporate play nearing its dramatic climax. The era of unaccountable mediocrity at Innovate Solutions was about to come to an abrupt and decisive end. The call from the panicked receptionist sent ripples of alarm through the upper floors of Innovate Solutions. Mark Henderson and Sarah Jenkins, who had likely just finished congratulating themselves on efficiently dismissing the unqualified sociologist, were suddenly informed that the Chief of Staff and Head of HR from Vance Global, their new parent company's absolute top brass, were in their lobby demanding an immediate meeting and access to everything. The news hit them like a physical blow. They exchanged horrified glances. Why were they here? Unannounced. An operational review. This was unheard of, unprecedented, and deeply ominous. They scrambled from their respective offices, hastily trying to compose themselves, their earlier smugness replaced by a rapidly growing dread. They met in the corridor, their faces pale. "What do you think this is about?" Jenkins whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. "I have no idea," Henderson hissed back. "Some kind of surprise audit? Did someone complain about something? It couldn't be that Holloway woman, could it? She didn't seem important enough to trigger this." But a seed of doubt had been planted. They hurried towards the lobby, trying to project an air of calm competence they were far from feeling. As they approached, they saw David Chen and Anya Sharma standing near the reception desk, their expressions coolly professional, expectant. And then Henderson's gaze fell upon the figure sitting quietly in the waiting area, still patiently reading the outdated magazine. Evelyn Holloway. He froze. For the first time, a genuine chilling premonition gripped him. Why was she still here? And why did she look so calm? David Chen spotted them. "Ah, Mr. Henderson, Miss Jenkins, thank you for joining us. If you'll come this way, we've been asked to utilize your main conference room for this review." He gestured, not invitingly, but with an air of directive. Henderson and Jenkins exchanged another panicked look, then followed Chen and Sharma, feeling like prisoners being led to their own interrogation. The 2 auditors had already fanned out, one heading towards the finance department, the other towards IT, their movements efficient and purposeful. As they passed the waiting area, Anya Sharma, Vance Global's head of HR, paused briefly beside Evelyn Holloway. "Ms. Vance," she said, her voice low but clear, filled with deference. "Will you be joining us now, or would you prefer to observe a little longer?" Henderson and Jenkins, who were just ahead, both stopped dead in their tracks, as if they'd run into an invisible wall. Their heads swiveled around in stunned, horrified unison to stare at the quiet woman in the ill-fitting suit. "Ms. Vance? As in Eleanor Vance, the CEO of Vance Global? The woman who now owned their entire company? The woman they had spent the last hour systematically insulting, demeaning, and dismissing as an unqualified, hobby-dabbling amateur? The color drained from Henderson's face. Jenkins looked like she was about to faint. Evelyn Holloway, no, Eleanor Vance, slowly lowered her magazine, a small, almost pitying smile playing on her lips. "I think, Anya," she said, her voice no longer hesitant but imbued with its natural, quiet authority, "it's time I joined the meeting." She stood up, her posture subtly changing, straightening, a hint of the formidable CEO emerging from the carefully constructed Evelyn Holloway persona. The ill-fitting suit suddenly seemed irrelevant. All Henderson and Jenkins could see were her eyes, sharp, intelligent, and now fixed on them with an expression that promised a reckoning. The walk to the conference room, their conference room, felt like the longest journey of Henderson's and Jenkins' lives. Eleanor Vance walked beside David Chen and Anya Sharma, her earlier disguise as Evelyn Holloway now completely shed. The quiet politeness was still there, but it was now underpinned by an undeniable aura of command. The ill-fitting suit was just a temporary costume. The powerful intellect and decisive leadership were innate. Henderson and Jenkins trailed behind, their faces a mixture of disbelief, terror, and dawning, sickening realization. They replayed the entire interview in their minds, every condescending remark, every dismissive gesture, every smug glance now magnified into a career-ending blunder. "Your resume is rather sparse. A homemaker, essentially. Do you have that killer instinct? Try to keep it coherent." The words echoed, each one a nail in their professional coffins. Inside the conference room, Eleanor took a seat at the head of the table, a place usually reserved for Henderson during departmental meetings. David Chen and Anya Sharma sat on either side of her. Henderson and Jenkins were gestured to the seats opposite, feeling less like managers and more like errant schoolchildren summoned to the principal's office, a principal who happened to own the entire school district. "Mr. Henderson, Ms. Jenkins," Eleanor began, her voice calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it even more terrifying. "Let's talk about my interview this morning. Or rather, let's talk about the culture at Innovate Solutions that it so clearly revealed." For the next hour, Eleanor, with occasional input from Chen and Sharma, who presented data from initial rapid assessments, systematically dissected not just their unprofessional conduct during the sham interview, but the broader patterns of mismanagement, inefficiency, disrespect, and toxic behavior that her brief observation and prior intelligence had indicated were rife within the subsidiary. She spoke of the high turnover in their R&D department, the stifled innovation, the reported instances of bullying and favoritism that HR under Ms. Jenkins had consistently ignored or mishandled. She detailed how Henderson's acquisition strategy seemed based more on ego and internal politics than on sound financial or strategic rationale. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were like surgical instruments, precise, cutting, exposing the rot. She used their own condescending phrases back at them, not with malice, but to illustrate her points about their judgment and professionalism. "You asked if I had killer instinct, Mr. Henderson. Perhaps what Innovate Solutions truly needs is less killer instinct and more collaborative intelligence. You asked if my experience was relevant, Ms. Jenkins. Perhaps you should have considered that all experience, viewed with an open mind, can offer value. You were looking for someone to fit a mold. I was looking for a company worth investing in further, beyond the initial acquisition cost." Henderson and Jenkins sat in stunned, horrified silence, their careers flashing before their eyes. There were no excuses they could offer, no defenses they could mount. They had been caught red-handed by the one person they should have been most desperate to impress, precisely because they had assumed she was no one important. Vance Global acquired Innovate Solutions because of its underlying technological promise, and the few truly brilliant minds we know are still within its ranks, despite the prevailing culture, Eleanor continued, her gaze unwavering. "My purpose in coming here today as Evelyn Holloway was to see firsthand whether that culture was salvageable or whether a more radical restructuring was required." The word radical hung in the air. What I witnessed this morning in my own interview was not an anomaly. It was, I suspect, symptomatic of a deeper malaise, a culture where disrespect is tolerated, where appearances are valued over substance, where true talent is likely stifled or driven away by managers who are more interested in protecting their own fiefdoms than in fostering innovation or collaboration. She paused, letting her words sink in. Mr. Henderson, Ms. Jenkins, your conduct today was not just unprofessional, it was actively detrimental to the health and potential success of this company. You failed to identify potential, you created a hostile environment, and you demonstrated a profound lack of judgment and basic human decency. Anya Sharma, head of HR for Vance Global, then spoke, her voice firm. Effective immediately, both of you are suspended from all duties pending a full investigation by Vance Global's internal affairs and HR departments. You will escort our security team, who are now on site, from the premises. You will have no further contact with any Innovate Solutions employees until this investigation is concluded. David Chen added, all your system access has been revoked. Please hand over your company ID badges and any company property to Ms. Sharma. The swiftness, the totality of the decision was breathtaking. There was no negotiation, no appeal. Just the quiet, efficient execution of a decision made by a CEO who had seen enough. Henderson looked like he might be physically ill. Jenkins was openly weeping, her carefully constructed professional facade shattered. They were escorted out, their departure marking the symbolic end of an era at Innovate Solutions. Eleanor then addressed the remaining senior managers of Innovate, who had been hastily summoned by David Chen. Her message was clear: change was coming, accountability would be enforced, and the culture of disrespect would end. She announced an interim leadership team from Vance Global and a company-wide town hall for all Innovate employees later that day. She intended to speak to them directly, to lay out her vision, and to make it clear that the values of Vance Global, respect, integrity, innovation, and collaboration, would now be the values of Innovate Solutions. The town hall meeting later that day was packed. Employees, nervous and uncertain, listened as Eleanor Vance, now dressed in her own familiar, impeccably tailored but understated CEO attire, addressed them. She didn't gloss over the problems. She spoke frankly about the toxic culture she had personally witnessed and the inefficiencies that had plagued the company. But she also spoke with passion about Innovate's potential, about the brilliant technology at its core, and about her commitment to making it a place where talented people could thrive, free from bullying and mismanagement. My interview this morning as Evelyn Holloway was an unconventional approach, she told the assembled staff, but it gave me an unvarnished look at what some of you may experience. And I tell you now, that is not acceptable. That is not how Vance Global operates. And that is not how Innovate Solutions will operate going forward. She outlined plans for new leadership, for better training, for open communication channels, and for a renewed focus on employee well-being and a respectful workplace. There was a palpable sense of relief, even hope, in the room. Many employees had suffered silently under the old regime, feeling powerless to effect change. Now change had arrived, decisively and from the very top. The story of the CEO who went undercover and got bullied in her own company's job interview became an instant legend within Vance Global and beyond. It served as a stark lesson for managers everywhere. Treat every individual with respect, because you never know who they truly are or who they might become, or in this case, who they already were. Eleanor Vance continued to lead Vance Global with her characteristic blend of sharp intellect and quiet determination. Innovate Solutions, under new leadership and infused with a healthier culture, began to flourish, its brilliant engineers finally unencumbered by toxic management. And Evelyn Holloway became an internal code word at Vance Global for any initiative designed to get an honest, unvarnished look at the reality on the ground. A reminder that true insight often requires walking a mile in someone else's ill-fitting shoes. Because the most effective leaders don't just sit in the corner office, they understand the view from every desk, especially the ones where people are made to feel small. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that true leadership is about empathy and action, and that underestimating the quiet ones is always a costly mistake.